So we are super excited. I'm your host, Taylor Siebert with Striv Education here on the Future Ready Educators community. And one of the spaces we really want to continue to explore is the space of all things business and entrepreneurship. I connected with Charlie Cuddy this summer through the Nebraska Tech Collaborative, and we had a great conversation. He's got a background in education. He's a former educator, now a venture capitalist, co-founder and managing partner of Move Venture Capital, and the co-founder and executive director of the Nebraska Startup Academy. Lots of different things going on in your world. And today we're going to be talking about, as we talked earlier this summer, is what are some of the things maybe business teachers need some help understanding, and even myself. And Charlie said, what if we discuss the topic of a startup versus a small business? And I wanted to learn. So here we are. Thank you, Charlie, for joining us.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for letting me join. And those of you that are here live, hopefully we'll get some Q&A at the end. And those watching the recording, feel free. I'll leave my contact information if you have follow-up questions afterwards. So maybe just jump in, or is there anything else?
Yeah, let's dive in. Yep, go ahead and share your screen. And if in the chat while he's doing that, would love if you could go ahead and put your name, what you teach, if you're a teacher, and what organization or school you're with. If you're not a teacher, put your title and organization just so we can introduce, and then your location. So name, what your role is at your organization, what organization is, and location, so we can see. We've got people kind of all over the country here today. So take it away, Charlie.
Awesome. Well, I had my name in there too, just to set the tone there for the chat. But super excited to chat through startup and small businesses. Talking about what business teachers need to know, and really what I was just hoping to accomplish here is to kind of level set on the differences. A lot of times we hear it in our community all the time as well, just interchanging the words, which may not seem like a huge deal, but as it comes, as these startups start growing, as these small businesses start maturing, just making sure we're all on the same page can be really, really important. So just kind of level set here. I'll just give a quick background on myself, kind of an entrepreneurial mindset, some definitions around small businesses and startups with the similarities and differences, a couple examples, talking through how do you identify which of the paths, is it the startup or small businesses, you have the kind of entrepreneurial bug and are trying to figure out what you want to go do, which path you go down. Talk about just high level from a business plan perspective, how you would maybe talk about them on the early side of things as you kind of map out that journey, and then leave some time for some questions and answers. So I will just jump really quickly. No one wants to spend very much time on my background, but instead of saying, just going to level set on why I'm here and what's going on. So previously spent nearly a decade at Bryan High School. At Bryan, I was a high school math teacher. And one of the things I started noticing was there's a big gap in the technology space at my school. So got my master's in curriculum development, taught myself to code, and built out a program that mapped computer science standards to math standards so that students who were on the fringe of graduating needing math credit could get that math credit, but essentially learn Agile, Scrum, and entry-level JavaScript and Ruby on Rails is what we did in the class. Also taught cross-country track over there. But getting super involved into the tech community opened up the startup world. So I spent my summers, every summer I was a teacher. I spent as an intern at either a tech startup or places around town like LinkedIn or PayPal, things like that, and opened up some different job opportunities that way. So joined a startup in the summer, ended up never going back to the classroom after that, and joined as a cloud engineer and customer success manager. Spent a few years doing that before getting opportunity. Jason Calcanis, angel investor, Silicon Valley, has a couple great podcasts from a startup perspective. This Week in Startups, if you haven't checked that out, it's been around over a decade now. Thousands of episodes with industry leaders in the space. Some really good content there. But he needed somebody to essentially build out an incubator, put out a tweet, said, does anyone have a background in curriculum with a passion for startups that wants to work directly with me to kind of change early stage investing in Silicon Valley? So raised my hand on Twitter, joined his team, built out a program for him. Ended up building that and managing it for the first 4 cohorts, which ended up having around 850 startups come through that program while I was overseeing it, from just under 40 countries, and then worked very closely with his investment team member. But those experiences really opened my eyes to some of the huge gaps that we saw here, or that I saw here in the Midwest, in Nebraska especially, around early stage investing in those venture scalable startups. And so that's what led to launching Move Venture Capital at the beginning of the year, as well as the Nebraska Startup Academy, which is a nonprofit to essentially support entrepreneurship at its earliest stages. This is the gap I was talking about here in Nebraska. So just to kind of level set from a startup perspective in the venture capital space, there was, looking at the last $1 billion invested in the Nebraska startups. As you look from a dollars perspective, starting with the bigger bar kind of over on the right in the Series B and later, 536 million, half of it going to Series B and later. Makes sense. These companies are growing and scaling. But the part that really caught my eye was the number of deals. So that 22 deals, working back up the funnel to the Series A of 46 deals, working back up the funnel to 156. You can see this really starting to get wider, but that pre-seed, that accelerator, that idea kind of validation stage, it's really broken in a huge gap of 45 deals. Tried to represent it in a funnel that's broken over on the right. So these are the types of companies at the earliest stages that we'll spend some time talking about briefly today in this space where my companies really play. Again, I just wanted to include some background on Move. We don't have to talk about this here, but I'm happy to come back to it and talk about what our thesis is and what it's like to kind of early stage investing, but want to get more to the actual meat of it. Again, some early investments that we've made, can talk through some of the companies and those types of things, as well as the groups around the state that we're directly working with through different affiliations and co-investments and things like that. But again, happy to touch on this later at another time. So let's kind of jump into it. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on is this entrepreneurial mindset. So whether you're a small business or a startup, there's a handful of just skills that I think a lot of maybe your students or founders that you'll see have. One of them being this creativity and kind of innovation. Do you have an ability to think or come up with novel ideas, not afraid to kind of challenge status quo? Oftentimes in the classroom, that doesn't always resonate with a lot of teachers, where they're getting some pushback, but seeing those as characteristics of people that are innovative could be a kind of a new perspective and something that we really look for in founders. So problem solving, being able to kind of identify and address pain points in the market, think of new ways to solve problems, risk taking. And so what we think of here is just entrepreneurship is a highly risky career path. Startups maybe more so, and we'll get into this later, than small businesses in some regards. But essentially being able to go through and weigh risks versus rewards and understand kind of the differences that go on here. Adaptability. So again, just characteristics that we think of in an entrepreneur. You can have a plan, and that plan, that business model is essentially outdated once you hit submit on the paper and you've thought through everything. Next day something changes in the market, something changes within your business, and being able to adjust, pivot, and plan accordingly. But going back to the kind of the innovation, but the innovation with proactivity. So essentially, are you a doer, or can you get something started from nothing? That 0 to 1 concept is something you hear often in entrepreneurship, and being able to get something off the ground is something that we really look for in entrepreneurs. By passion and drive, just talking about solving a problem that gives you a sense of purpose. The idea of being an entrepreneur, having a business of your own, is not nearly as awesome as some of the movies and the books, after the fact make it seem. So really having a drive to deliver on what you want that to be are things that, again, we look for. And then getting a little bit more specific, having this customer-centric focus, and really it's being able to hear and listen to other people, the feedback that they're giving, those types of things. Obsessed with learning, networking, and then the last one here, vision. And a lot of these go together, of just being able to collaborate, being able to always be open to new ideas. We see a lot of these concepts where the Blockbusters of the world that thought they were too big to fail, and not open to learning or collaborating or having a vision to adjust to the new world. So I just wanted to quickly kind of touch on a few of these things of how can we kind of think about this from a classroom perspective, things that you're all, I'm sure, doing already in your classroom, but instilling creativity and innovation by encouraging brainstorming and giving real life examples and coming up with unconventional ways to solve them, challenging, pushing back on common conceptions in terms of problem solving. The risk-taking one, this no fear of failure, is one that really stood out to me in the classroom as I moved to entrepreneurship. Teaching AP classes, so often students are, what's my grade? How's this going to impact my grade? I don't want to try this thing because I have a 4.0, and if I try it and I'm not really that good at it, I don't know how it's going to go. And so, giving permission to fail and fail in intelligent ways where you can learn is one thing when it comes to starting a business or being an entrepreneur that I really think that from an education perspective that we could really foster in our students is less about the grade and more about what they're learning. Being able to evolve here. Projects that I loved doing with the students was giving them, you're not trying to throw them down rabbit holes or anything like that, but essentially allowing the project to a long-term project to evolve over time, where you give some standards and after a couple of weeks of working on it, say, oh yeah, and another thing that we need to consider in this project, and how can they adapt it to grow and become bigger than what it was. So I would always reference back to, your business is going to encounter some pivots. You can't be so ingrained in your original idea from day one that 2 or 3 weeks later, we're going to introduce a small wrinkle to the project and see how can you adjust and go in those types of things. Providing opportunities for leadership, taking initiative as a group or as a class is one way that different parts of an entrepreneur can really kind of shine forth. Some of these other ones really align between determination, feedback, exploring, all similar concepts, right? That you're giving them permission to make a project their own, to do those types of things, where they can actually work together or challenge each other. Group work and goal setting. The goal setting one, I just think is one that we can really work with students on, whether it's actually in a small business setting or a startup setting. But so often the students' goals are either so broad that they don't have deliverable actions, or they're so specific to the exact, I'm going to get an A on this project. And it's like, okay, what did you learn? How are you going to use this? What's going to happen, into the next project, and those types of things. Helping them set obtainable goals is an entrepreneurial mindset that we can really foster in the next generation. So I wanted to run through those as a way of just level setting that the entrepreneur, one isn't better than the other. Startup's not better than a small business. A small business isn't better than a startup. They're just different kind of paths under the same entrepreneurial mindset. So level setting with that, I'm sure that you have students, you have people within your lives that are entrepreneurial or have a small business startup kind of mindset, and that they have a lot of the same qualities. But understanding what the differences are is what I wanted to spend some time and being able to dive into some questions later on. But essentially, from a startup perspective, we're thinking of a newly established business that has a unique, typically it's a product or has some kind of new model at which they're going to build around. The big thing here is the rapid growth and scale, which there's a few characteristics here, and I'll click through them here, but can they disrupt a market at a global scale, setting ambitious goals of, oftentimes we talk about, we use words like venture scale and things like that, but is there a path to, in 3-5 years, where this idea has 50, 60, 100 employees, within the next 5 years? Those are what we're talking about when we're talking about the scale at which they could reach. And oftentimes, in order to hit it that quickly, it's going to require some form of outside funding. And so A small business has a lot of the same characteristics, tackling it from a different scale. So it's usually a little bit smaller, and it's really focused in a local or regional market. And oftentimes it's the same people that started it that are running it 5-10 years from now with maybe a couple employees. But the scale is really limited to the resources that they personally as an individual have. We talk often with our startups, you can't really scale people. You can scale the technologies, you can scale business, you can scale those pieces of it, and you can bring on more people. But the scale at which you have people running or own or working within your business is really one of the key factors here in terms of the differences between a startup and a small business. So let's just jump into some examples of what we mean by high scalability, rapid growth, and limited scalability, these types of things. So when we're talking about the scale, okay, we're talking about being able to go from that first couple customers to hundreds or thousands, potentially millions of customers within a 5, 7, 10-year window. Your local bakery is going to have a hard time hitting that level of scale that quickly. And so a lot of the growth, those types of things, it's really, and we'll jump into down towards the end around like just the business models and thinking about putting it pen to paper and like what we want this to be. It's really 5 to 7 years from now. How big is this company? How can I scale this? And so startups aren't defined by being technology based. You can have startups outside of the technology space, but technology really lends itself to the startup. You can write the code one time, one person can use it, 10 people can use it, 1,000 people can use it without needing to hire a bunch of new developers. Your bakery or your hair salon has a lot harder time going from one cake, one haircut to 10, 100, 1,000 cakes and haircuts with the same individual running it. And so that's the biggest difference in terms of, as you're thinking through what is a startup, what is a small business, how do we identify or kind of bucket these into different things. And the other piece is when you're swinging for the fences like this, right? When you're thinking really ambitious goals from a startup perspective, the cost of the risk and the chance of failure goes up quite a bit. We see often there's statistics all over, depending on where you are and what you're building and all those things, but a pretty standard number is around 80-90% of startups will fail in that first year. And a lot of the times it's because there's such ambitious goals that you're swinging for a home run that you're a lot more likely to strike out. A small business, on the other hand, is typically in the 20-25% chance of failing in that first year. And a lot of times your growth strategies are very conservative. You have a plan, you're not trying to burn tens of thousands of dollars on a marketing channel that you're not sure of. You're really relying on, your local community where you have support from people, and you're using word of mouth to kind of grow your business. That being said, the funding stages really, really impact that, right? So if you have angel investors, and again, we can dive into some of the terminology on these things later, but if you have individuals from a startup that are willing to put some money to essentially act as jet fuel and say, hey, I understand there's a 90% chance this is going to go to zero. But with a 25, 50, 100K check, can you figure out, can this thing grow really, really quick in the next 3, 6, 12 months to give us an idea if it's on that hockey stick kind of exponential growth trajectory? The funding on the small business typically doesn't work that way. You're usually saving up money, maybe taking out some loans, and banks just aren't as interested in that kind of risk. So when you're thinking about choosing a path and thinking of different examples, I like to use a couple examples here from the startup space. So, an Uber, an Airbnb, something that, the Uber example is just such a great example where a couple guys needed a ride from the airport and taxis were terrible. And so they started this thing as, hey, what if we just waited at airports and could pick people up faster than cabs could? And they started it essentially, gave the illusion of an app, but it was literally someone would type something into what was their app, and it would essentially just text them, and they would text back through an interface that said, "Hey, we're on our way." And it was really geared as a high end, black car kind of service. That then they started pivoting and were like, how do we scale this? Like, there's some interest, and they were in that kind of almost startup mentality. It was a couple guys that were driving around from their apartment to airports. It was like, we need to think through a business model that will allow us to scale this, so that we can't drive everybody. We can only hit our ceiling of how many miles we can put in with the distance in a day. And so that's where they, kind of pivoted to this marketplace concept that allowed them to go internationally. Same idea with Airbnb, SpaceX. A lot of them had innovative technology with just really, really detailed global marketing in a relatively short amount of time, given the growth at which they were going in. They all took on outside funding. So small businesses were thinking more local retail stores, family-owned restaurants, those types of things, hair salons, accounting firms like we talked about. These have really, really strong quality products with a more hands-on, personalized approach, where they drive community engagement. You're going to your favorite restaurant, local bar, those types of things that you're frequently all the time, and keeping them in business. It's a nice form of revenue. Again, it's one of those things that we talk about with founders. It's like someone who can make a several $100,000 million a year running a local business that has no intention of ever leaving, Grand Island, Nebraska, is still a phenomenal business that you can have a comfortable, amazing lifestyle living in that entrepreneurial way. They're just kind of, you have to identify what goals do you have for your business, and how likely are you to grow it at that stage. There's oftentimes we have people from our investment side that come to us, say, hey, we would love for you to invest. And we kind of talk them through, hey, you have a path to profitability and a pretty solid setup to have a nice lifestyle business, a nice small business here. Why would you want us to have any ownership in that business? If you're going to sit there and, just with a small loan, or, just working through a couple tough months to get you over the hump, maintaining 100% of that business might be in your best interest. And so just, again, not a right or a wrong way, just two different kind of ways of thinking about entrepreneurship. And so when it comes to choosing a path, I just wanted to highlight a handful of things that are really going back to the same type of stuff we've been talking about. What's your vision, 5-7 years from now? Your startup idea, how big can it really get? And take that a step further, rather than you just thinking about it, but analyze the market. Is there an opportunity for this thing to get really big? That's something, if you decide that's the route to go, that you'll have to end up explaining to the venture capital firms who want to invest in you, is how many people are there even out there that will buy this thing? What % of those people out there can you get to buy it? The risk tolerance. You have to have the mindset that you're going to succeed, and the reality of knowing that the thing you're doing is extremely risky. And the chances of it, if it working out, maybe not that high. So just understanding and weighing the options, that you're putting yourself in a position that if it doesn't work out, that yourself, your family are in a spot that you can handle that. The resources, whether that's community resources, your own personal resources, a network of resources, just kind of understanding there, what do you have that can set you up and essentially de-risk to some extent what you're about to undertake. The other pieces that are really important is this founding team. If you can't talk to another individual and sell them on your vision, the idea of being able to sell to hundreds or thousands of people on the idea is kind of a good indicator of what are the chances of that being successful, and then essentially finding people with different skill sets or balancing to be able to take that to the next level. The other pieces are things that we've talked about that it's going to be hard. So wanting it to be successful, having a passion for it, solving a problem that you think is going to make you rich that you hate is not a great way to spend 5 to 7 years when it's going to be a rough go of it from a startup perspective and potentially a lifetime on a small business, handing off a business to your children rather than like exiting, here talking through exit strategies. On the startup side, you're often talking through an acquisition, maybe in some cases an IPO, someone bigger essentially taking over your company. Oftentimes in a small business, they'll, there's opportunities to sell and those types of things, of course. But you see a lot of times small businesses get passed down through generations and things like that. So understanding just what it's going to take from that perspective, and then the iterative approach and mentorship, finding people that have done it before in your network, having a group like you have here with Taylor's like awesome. Bouncing ideas, getting feedback, those types of things are huge in any of it, and allowing the students to do the same. If there's ways to collaborate across, small town Nebraska might have a handful of people that are interested in this, where communities in Omaha, just because of density of population, might have more, and connecting and recognizing some of the similarities and differences and bouncing ideas and sharing those experiences goes back to the founding team. Mentioning Grand Island, I'm sure there's skill sets that students have grown up with in Grand Island that differ from skill sets in larger cities and those types of things. So again, I'm not going to read through all of these to you, but essentially just some high level questions that you can ask yourself as you're trying to choose a path. How big can this be? How, what could come of it? What skills do I even have as you're trying to come up with an idea? We see sometimes founders who want to be entrepreneurs, but they don't know what they want to do. So can you align passions with a need and then start kind of backing your way into what that could be? As you start to see the characteristics we talked of earlier as students, that's a totally acceptable way to get into the entrepreneurial game. Is I know I don't want to go work for someone. I have all of the characteristics, but like, what can I do? No one's given me permission to start a company before. And then all I wanted to highlight here is some of the key things. Business plans, I really like them from a thought process perspective of having to put pen to paper and really, it's one thing to have an idea and maybe jot some things on the back of a napkin and you sit there and talk about it with buddies for a long time around what, this business idea is going to be great. But my favorite part on the business plan perspective is putting some kind of thought to pen, or pen to paper to get your thoughts out, and being able to talk through what this thing could be, knowing that there's a realistic chance by the time you finish it, again, it's outdated. Things are constantly changing in the space, but really talking through the focus, the market, how you're going to sell it, what the product is going to be, the team, financial projections. You'll notice a common theme here. In the startup business plan, you really want to focus on that scalability, right? How big can it be? How can we sell globally? All of that being said, you want to be able to see the big picture, but your startup oftentimes will start very niche, and you will start by selling to one group of people. And that's, I think, oftentimes where the confusion can become or can come in here, because the small business, you'll see, talking through all of the local communities, places where you live, we advise our startups to do the exact same thing in the early days. Find a small group of people that are having this problem and become the expert in the space, and then figure out, how do I take it from this niche group of people and grow it globally? The difference being, in the startup, the whole goal is to basically stay in that local niche. And so that's where I love the business plan, is being able to have a North Star while you tackle your kind of initial markets is something great to reference back to. So just quick in summary, if I had to sum it down to, or summarize it in 3 kind of bullet points, is the biggest difference between a startup and a small business is the scale, how big it can get. All entrepreneurs, essentially, whether it's small business or startup, are the same types of people. It's really just the business, the scale, how big it can get, taking that vision, the opportunity, and essentially the total addressable market, and identifying the differences there. So I will leave it at that. I'll leave contact information here. I'm sure Taylor posts deck if anybody wants it. All these links are easier than having to copy anything down. But with that, I'll
Yeah.
open
And
it up for questions.
so if you guys want to go back and watch this, we'll include a link to the slides. Couple questions here. Looks like Alexandra had to jump off, but she had asked a question that maybe wanted to loop in Jason, who has, I know, direct experience, but you might as well. I'll give you the first chance to answer that, of just kind of how do you provide some exercises and techniques, I think, to allow students to fail in a safe place. I think your school is the best place to do that because there's really no consequences unless it's a real business.
I agree. One of the things I did when I was in the classroom was not, like, intentionally not assigning grades, like on certain things. Like, this is the grade is it's almost a completion thing. And part of it's you have to get buy-in, right? Like, if a student's there to get the grade and pass the class, like, it's not as interesting. But if you can really deliver and create a community aspect that, failing is okay, then I think that's always really interesting. As soon as you make it A, B, C, D, F, they've been trained since kindergarten. That's what's important.
Yeah, for sure. Jason looks like he's got one project that they do. I'll see, Jason, if I'd like to pop you in here. You could share that real quick. I think that'd be valuable for the recording to add. I had a question, Charlie. Have you seen an example of a business that maybe started out locally, regionally, went to a local bank, would be in this sense categorized as a small business, but then maybe created a product or a piece of software or technology and knew that they couldn't go the route that they chose to begin their business, that they needed to go the startup route and go get funding, and this product that they magically landed on or discovered the problem to a solution had high scalability? Have you anything pop up?
Totally. Yeah, we see it a ton, and that's one of the things that it's always a tough dance to do, especially from our investor perspective. We will typically invest on the startup side, but we see a ton of times where what thought of as a small business all of a sudden pops. And so, like, that's a big reason why I want to take all of the meetings. But the most common example is oftentimes somebody decides, hey, I got a service-based business, or I have an expertise, and I'm going to be a consultant that essentially sells my time, which is not scalable, right? And then all of a sudden decides, like, man, the stuff that I'm doing is pretty repetitive. I could probably create a product around it. I could allow some of this to take off, and then it kind of turns. It's one of the things we look for is, like, in those early stages, it's like, hey, maybe I have like a 10% of my 10%, 20% has like a small product component, and like 80% services. It's not that interesting from an investment perspective because of the scalability. But if there's a path to where they could switch, and oftentimes that's kind of what it takes, where all of a sudden 70-80% is product, and they just have a nice little upsell of a premium service piece that everyone can get the stuff out of. The product is totally interesting.
Yeah. And thank you, Jason. That's probably easier than trying to get you on here, is just to leave that in the chat, and I can maybe include some of that on the recap of some of the different challenges. Looking at case studies, obviously, is a super great way to get students to understand that. And the best way is for them to create something and it not go well, and have them feel that experience, right? So that they don't want to have that experience again. I know for me, that's what's really motivating and driving for me, is you're always learning, you're always iterating. And you mentioned some of those qualities at the beginning of an entrepreneur. I think of myself in starting Striv over 10 years ago, and even before that, I blew insulation in attics. It was a problem. I had the solution because I had the machine and it was in that space, and there was a need for my product. I think a lot of times the students I interact with, they go straight to the Instagram or the Ubers and things like that, and they can't even comprehend what that looks like. And it's so much simpler than that when you break it down. Is, hey, people are waiting for taxis and they needed a ride. They jump to what Uber is now and they forget how it started with just a text message. You want to speak on that, Charlie?
Yeah, well, and just how ugly it is, right?
Yeah.
Like, how many companies are at that super ugly stage right now, or that super small stage that no one knows about in any way, shape, or form, because we're still glorifying the ones that have already achieved it. It's like, well, if you're just starting your idea, it's not even close to fair to compare yourself to billions of dollars and tons of years of experience of an Uber or an Airbnb or SpaceX or companies like that. You should be comparing yourself to the companies that you don't know about yet, that are several days old. And so it is a hard mindset kind of to shift. But it's like, you even look at Facebook. If you look at back at starting in one college, expanding, some of the photos of what that looked like, just it's almost unrecognizable. But it had enough traction that allowed them to get to a couple more colleges, to go to all of the colleges, to expand to people beyond college, beyond the United States, and like it get to a product that it is today that's essentially more than even a social network. Like, and part of it, to your question earlier, it's like that always had scalability, but I don't know if it even the most ambitious of goals, like a Mark Zuckerberg, I would be shocked to know when he was writing his initial lines of code, if today's product is what he had. He was able to adapt. He was able to take advantage of opportunities and change along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, if there's any other questions as we wrap things up, I want to thank Charlie. He does a ton of events around the Omaha metro area. You've been all over the country, and appreciate you kind of sharing just a sliver of knowledge in your world, and excited to see move, grow, and you've got some exciting news coming with the Nebraska Startup Academy, some education that we're trying to collaborate on to provide to business educators as well, which is why we did this event, just to kind of gauge interest. And I feel like there's a great need for entrepreneurship education in schools, especially rural schools, but also in larger school districts where they're trying to foster an entrepreneurship mindset of innovation and creating different things. And so, Charlie, share your best way to find you. I know you're pretty active on all social platforms, but what's the best place? Maybe you could drop the link in the chat so they can connect with you.
Yeah, totally. I'm very active on all of the social platforms. Like you said, LinkedIn is usually a place where I'm pretty active. I'll drop that here. Also happy to set up other times to chat, or small groups, or now that I'm in your guys' circle community, like feel free to tag me in posts. I'll try and be as active even in circle as I can. I will never lose my passion for education. So if there's ways that I can ever help in a classroom, or if maybe it's even bringing in different entrepreneurs, as Taylor was expressing, we're close to launching an online platform for Nebraska and Midwest founders. We would never turn anybody away that's not in Nebraska or the Midwest as we get that thing going. But the content is going to be very specific there. There's a lot of great resources if you're building in Silicon Valley and New York and those types of cities. So that's what our main focus will be. If there's ways that the teachers in your network or their students could find value, like, happy to have those conversations and go from there.
Yeah, I think one of the neat things, Charlie, is that as you said that popped up, is I know one of the needs teachers are always looking for, and that's what we talk about, is bridging that gap between what's happening in the industry and what teachers are allowed to or get access to. And that's why we created this community that's free, but we also have paid products with our digital media and broadcasting education that we're doing. But they're always looking for different examples and guest speakers. And so maybe that's something we can collaborate on, is you've got a startup that you guys invested in that you want to share their story, that we could do, pop in a community event and share kind of how they got started and be a great example for students and teachers, something they could play, share that during class as an example. I think those are always valuable. So that'd be cool.
I love it. We have examples of a lot of the founders that we've invested in. We have a wide range of of
Awesome.
founders that we've invested in from all kinds of different walks of life, ages, but they love participating and giving back as well. So
Yeah.
as topics come up and things like that, for sure, reach out, and if I have resources, I'll share. If I have people that might be interesting,
Yeah.
to connect.
Awesome. So yeah, if you're watching this recording, please, Charlie is in the community, so you can tag him. You can send him a direct message. He's active as they're building a circle community as well. So I love the collaboration and really appreciate it, Charlie. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You bet. Thank you for those of you joining us live, and make it a great day. Thank you.